Every season, for every football team, for every football fan, there are a few games that you circle, right? Even when you just find out a year ago or whatever it is that it's happening, you circle that game, right? You circle that game because you know it is going to have a big impact on the season or will be a big test for how your team does that season. I think I'm safe to say that every Utah fan and every Oklahoma State fan had this game and has this game circled as one of those games. Not only is it the clear toughest test so far for both teams this year, I think a lot of people believe this will be the toughest test for both teams in regular season conference play. So this is a big one, guys. It's also the first game of conference play, and it is looking out to be a barn burner and a heck of a game. Utah heads to Stillwater to play Oklahoma State. It is going to be a banger, guys. It is going to be a fun time. I'm excited to break it down. Let's go ahead and dive in and talk Oklahoma State versus Utah. Okay, guys, and if you're not aware, we are a part of the 1012 network. The 1012 network has been awesome enough to, make me a part of it, and I'm glad to be a part of it. The 1012 network is sponsored by Charlie Hustle. Charlie Hustle of Vintage Made Fresh. Check out the shirts. They sent me some clothes, really nice stuff. Use code 101215 at www.charliehustle.com to get 15% off all non-sale merchandise. So definitely check them out. They do a really good job. Again, that's charliehustle.com, 10, 12, 15 for 15% off all merchandise. Charlie Hustle, Vintage Made Fresh. A lot of Utah fans already follow this channel, but whether you're a Big 12 fan, Oklahoma State fan, or a Utah fan, if this is your first time on the channel, I'm going to give you a little idea of what to expect here. What I try to bring you is a very detailed, very analytical view of how the game's going to go. Obviously, there's a lot of eye test involved and a lot of opinion as well, right? And some homerism. I'm a Utah fan, but I'm going to bring a lot of data to the table and take a look at a lot of different numbers. If you're into that sort of thing, it should be a great time. We're going to talk, PFF grades. We'll talk season ranking so far for yards allowed, yards on offense, rushing yards, passing yards. We're going to break it all down to get a really strong idea of the players and teams involved in this matchup. So we'll all have a really strong idea of what will go right or wrong for either team to win or lose. So if you're into that, before we dive in, guys, please make sure you smash that like button. It'll help get it out to more fans. Also, comment down below. I like this exercise. I did it on the last video, and I'm going to do it again now. Give me a comment right now before we break down everything of what you think the score is going to be. And then at the end, once we've broken down all the numbers, I'd like you guys to comment again and give me an idea of what you think the score is going to be after we break everything down. I think it puts a lot into perspective and gives you a lot to think about. And if you haven't already and you're a big Utah fan or Big 12 fan, make sure you guys subscribe to the channel. We put out a ton of content. But like I said, guys, we're going to talk about all the matchups. We're going to break it down. It's going to be my first real detailed, real deep dive of the year. It's the first game where I actually have the bandwidth of information to get that done, and I'm very excited to do it. Let's go ahead and dive in. Go Utes. Also, one quick housekeeping measure before we dive into everything. The word on the street is Cam Rising will be playing. So we are going to base all these numbers around the fact that Cam Rising will be playing when we do these predictions. Another side note is I do also believe that means Karine Reed is going to be playing. So that should be good. Utah should have some extra firepower back there. But I want to touch on those things before we do start breaking everything down because they will factor in to what these numbers look like. Okay, guys, and we're going to start this video off by looking at the players to watch for both teams, and we're going to look at the stat leaders. So right out the gate, Cam Rising is going to be the number one guy for Utah. We're going to start with Utah's offense. 346 passing yards on the year, 62.1% completion percentage, 7 TDs, 0 INTs, and a 65 PFF grade. Quarterbacks can be judged a little harder, and it's probably the position most of the time that I least agree with the grades on, but they do have Cam at least an average grade. What I love about these numbers, and I think a lot of people, I didn't even know this until I was breaking down the numbers. Cam is at 7 TDs and 0 INTs on the year. So 7 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. And Cam has only played 3 quarters of football. Just so everyone understands that Cam has only played 3 quarters of football, and he has 7 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. I mean, he is a special player that continues to prove itself week in and week out. And he is a guy that I am super impressed with. He's also a very versatile weapon with his legs. He can definitely make plays with his feet. But just so you guys know, those are numbers you're looking at. Yeah, 2 of the 3 quarters are against an FCS team. But 1 of the quarters is against Baylor, where he looked awesome before a rough, some would call a dirty play, forced an injury on Cam. Now, next up, we have a guy that has been playing all season in Mekhi Bernard. Mekhi Bernard, 274 rushing yards, 6.7 yards per carry, 1 touchdown on the year, and he's grading out at a 78.5. That is a borderline elite grade, and I think the play on the field matches that up, guys. I mean, you look at those numbers, like I was just saying. I mean, this guy's got 6.7 yards per carry, and don't forget, one of those games was when Isaac Wilson was in, and they were stacking the box a lot to try to limit what we could do in the run game, right? I don't know if you guys remember, but that first quarter, if you're new to the channel or you're not a Utah fan, watching that game, the first quarter, we couldn't run the ball for anything, right? And so eventually it opens up, but that's including when they were just stacking the box and we couldn't do much. But Mekhi Bernard, he's also a very versatile receiving weapon, hasn't been used a lot in that area so far to start the year, but he's coming on as right now the best offensive player for Utah so far this season, and I expect him to follow it up with another big performance against Oklahoma State. We've also got Mike Mitchell, 116 rushing yards, 4.5 yards per carry, 1 touchdown, and a 68.2 PFF grade, which is above average. So real good start to the season for Mike Mitchell, right? I think he looks awesome, a powerful bruising back and a guy that is going to try to make plays, solid 4.5 yards per carry, and is clear to me when I'm watching the next guy up whenever we need someone to run the ball outside of Mekhi. We've also got Brant Kuithe here, 8 receptions, 142 yards, 3 touchdowns with a 75.8 PFF grade. That's a very good PFF grade. And then on the year, he's averaging almost 50 yards per game. And don't forget, in that first game, he only played about 2 quarters till we pulled him. So he looks awesome, right? Brant looks like he's in for a very special year. And I'm excited to see him, live up to all that hype. But he's a guy, he's tracking for quite a year, 700 plus yards. Then we've got Money Parks. Money Parks, 8 receptions, 133 yards, 2 touchdowns, 67.9 PFF grade. So well above average there, solid PFF grade. And looked really good in the second half of that Baylor game and helped us go ahead and solidify that win towards the end of the game by making a couple plays. But then also in the Utah State game, made some nice catches and was hooking up pretty well with Isaac Wilson. We also have Dorian Singer, 10 receptions, 109 yards, and a 64.7 PFF grade. Had kind of been irrelevant until last week against Utah State, and Dorian Singer kind of stepped up to the plate, showed the fans what's up, and looked awesome. I'm very excited about the guy, and really 66 yards were last week. So don't forget that. I mean, he's tracking to do well, and it seems like he's starting to find his flow in this offense. So I'm excited to see what Dorian Singer does this year. A couple honorable mention guys on the offense. We've got Dijon Stanley. Dijon Stanley killed it out the gate against SUU. But since then, he did solid against Baylor, not bad against Baylor, but really underwhelmed against Utah State. I'm hoping he can, find his place back this week, but that's the only reason. His actual stats are pretty dang good, and he has more receiving yards than any of the guys I mentioned. I just think after last week's rough performance, it's hard for me to give him too much of a shout out right now, but still an honorable mention. Caleb Lohner, another honorable mention, a guy that has become a beast red zone threat, 6'8", huge basketball transfer from Baylor, looks awesome, and a guy that is deadly, has blocked a couple field goals already. Very, very scary, imposing player, and a guy I'm excited to see, as the season gets rolling, just how much he can contribute. Also on offense, Carson Ryan, another deadly tight end. Carson Ryan started to get into the game plan the past couple weeks and is slowly starting to make his statement on this offense, but I do want to see a little more before I include him in the main list. And that is going to be the offense for Utah. All right, guys. Next up, we're going to go with the defense for Utah. So the defense for Utah starts with Van Fillinger. Van Fillinger, 16 tackles on the year, 3.5 sacks on the year, 10 pressures as well, 7 stops, and 3 passes defended, and a 70.7 PFF grade so far in the year. And just to give you guys an idea, 3.5 sacks in 3 games, that means he's tracking for a 14-plus sack season. So very impressed with this guy. Van Fillinger seems to be coming into his own this year. And like I said, is tracking for a very special year. And on top of that, 10 pressures in 3 games, that's a good amount of pressures. He is getting back there and making some plays on the quarterback. Very, very impressed with Van. Van, 7 stops as well. If you guys aren't familiar with PFF, a stop is a neutral or negative play for the offense. So that means it's either a tackle for a loss or a tackle right at the line, stuff like that. So very good stats to start off the year. And the 3 pass deflections, that is an edge rusher. Just so you guys know, Van Fillinger is an edge rusher with 3 pass deflections. That means he is getting his hands up and smacking the ball down when the quarterback tries to throw it. Very impressive. Next, we've got Te'o Johnson. 14 tackles on the year, 1 pass defended, and 5 stops. Very impressive for a safety to be doing something like that. And he's got a 79.5 PFF grade. So one of the better safeties in the country, and is continuing to look good, very good so far this year. We've also got Smith Snowden here. He came down with that wild one-handed interception against Utah State last week where it looked like they were going to score a touchdown. He has 13 tackles on the year, 1 pass defended, 1 interception, and 3 stops. For a cornerback to have 3 stops, guys, that means that guy is getting back there, making tackles for loss, making plays, and making statements. He's also got a 73.2 PFF grade. And say what you will about Utah State, they had quite the receiving core, and I think his numbers are pretty impressive so far for the year. We've also got Lander Barton, our linebacker, 12 tackles, 1 pass defended, 3 stops, a 66.2 PFF grade. Solid year for him so far, but we haven't seen like a breakout game or a game where he made a wild impact. I feel like Oklahoma State's going to be a good one for Lander to kind of get out there and show the world what he's capable of. Connor O'Toole, these numbers, I think what makes it so impressive is, I think it's going to be, when you look at these numbers, know it's on 99 snaps. That's why I'm putting it out there. Just be aware, it's very impressive for 99 snaps. He has 12 tackles, 2.5 sacks, 6 pressures, and 4 stops. That's almost a 6% pressure rate. Very impressive there. And 4 stops. Think about that, guys. 4 stops on 99 snaps. Very good. Not grading out super well, just a 60.0 PFF grade. So hard to say too much, but I did think Connor O'Toole was one of the guys that needed a shout out. Hopefully that PFF grade improves. Honorable mention, though, the rest of the defense. I mean, there are a bunch of studs. I was not sure who else to pick. Keanu Tanuvasa is having a great year. Junior Tavuna is having a great year. Elijah Davis is looking good. Nate Ritchie's looking good. Karine Reed has looked good in his limited playing time. There's a ton of very good players on this defense. Jonathan Hall looked good. There's a lot of good players for this Utah team. Those are just, the guys that I thought really stood out that I wanted to give shout outs to. Next up, we are going to be taking a look at this Oklahoma State offense. So the Oklahoma State offense, funny, if you would have asked me 3 weeks ago who I thought we'd really be focused on, it would be Ollie Gordon, but that is not the case. Alan Bowman has been the man over there at Utah State. On the year, he's got 967 passing yards. That's over 320 passing yards per game, a 67% completion percentage, 8 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions with an 82.2 PFF grade. So, elite PFF grade. He has really stood out and really showed up to start the year and has really impressed, guys. He's going to be a huge factor in this game. Alan Bowman playing right now like one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Next guy we'll talk about is going to be Ollie Gordon. So 216 rushing yards. Sadly, though, at least for Oklahoma State fans, not for Utah fans, he's averaging 3.5 yards per carry, which is quite low. That's a yard lower than what Mike Mitchell's averaging for Utah per carry, and almost over 3 yards lower than what Mekhi Bernard's averaging for Utah. So pretty concerning if you're an Oklahoma State fan. He is at a rough time. But I do think a lot of that is teams stacking the box against him and trying to limit him. And that's kind of what's opening up a lot of what Alan Bowman's doing, right? But definitely a rough start for Alan Bowman. But I do want to shout out this next guy, Dejon Stribling. Dejon Stribling is a wide receiver for Oklahoma State, and he is a playmaker. I was watching him last week in that Tulsa game multiple times, just got ridiculous separation or, just great position on the cornerback to catch a jump ball and make a play on the corner. He looks like a superstar. 17 receptions, 295 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a 78.9 PFF grade. And like I mentioned, sometimes quarterback grades are weird. Wide receivers are usually actually judged pretty harshly on their performance, right? On just how good they can be. Or, how do I put it? It's like it's hard to grade high as a wide receiver. So for him to have that many catches and grade that high on that many snaps is pretty impressive. Rashad Owens, 11 receptions for 188 yards and 1 touchdown. Not grading out super well according to PFF. That could be he was playing lesser talent and was able to get open because of that. And then Brennan Presley. This guy is a target machine, huh? 23 receptions, 172 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns. So this and a 74.3 PFF grade. So I think you guys can probably already tell that this game, a lot of it is going to be Utah's passing defense versus Oklahoma State's passing offense. It's, a lot of the stars for Utah that I mentioned on defense were in the DB room. A lot of the stars that I'm mentioning for Oklahoma State are in the receiving room. So it's going to be a fun matchup. They've also got Talon Shetron. Talon Shetron is a wide receiver, not a ton of snaps, but he has done really well on the snaps he's been given and has made a lot of plays. And then we have Trent Howland, who is not as much of a factor in the run game as Ollie Gordon, but has a significantly higher yards per carry average right now, just not as big of a part of the offense. But those are guys to keep an eye on as well. So that is the offense for Oklahoma State as we head into this matchup. All right. And next up, we are looking at the Oklahoma State defense. So Trey Rucker is the first stat leader for this Oklahoma State defense. His number is 9. 39 tackles, 2 pressures, 16 stops. So the numbers look awesome. But as awesome as they look, it is a little concerning. How is a guy getting 39 tackles 3 games into the year? That means he's tracking for almost 160 tackles, which means their defense must be on the field a lot. And what it means when your defense is on the field a lot is that the opposing offense is having long drives, which is not a good thing for defenders. So you look at that, their leading tackler has almost triple the amount of tackles our leading tackler has. And he has a 55.2 PFF grade. You can see it's marked red there because that is not a good thing. That is pretty rough. That is well below average. I've notated here he's awesome against the run, but he struggles in coverage. Excuse the typo there. He's allowed over 127 yards and has a coverage grade of 42.3. I'm going to imagine they might put that guy on Keithy from time to time, and I think he'll be an awesome guy for Utah to take advantage of. Next up, we've got Nick Martin, number 4. He's a linebacker, 34 tackles, 1 sack, 6 pressures, 2 pass defenses, 2 pass defenses, and 17 stops. 17 stops is a ridiculous number of stops, but again, a very below average PFF grade, a 60.6. Rough coverage grade again, just like with Rucker, and rough run defense grade. So he's struggling against the run and the pass. He does have a lot of stops, but he also has 5 missed tackles on the year already. That's almost 2 missed tackles a game. That is not a number you want to see. So their 2 stat leaders both are not grading out well, and overall look like they could be, liabilities for this Oklahoma State team. Next, we've got OB Azigbo, number 33. He's an edge rusher. He hasn't played a crazy number of stats, of snaps. So the numbers are actually pretty impressive when you look at him at face value. 12 tackles, 2 sacks, 9 pressures, 7 stops. But he only is grading out at a 59.8. He's a guy that has a lot of pressures for only 119 snaps, but really struggled against Arkansas. And that's really the only, team that you could say is pretty decent that Oklahoma State has played this year. So I think that's a concerning sign. But again, he's one of their stat leaders. We've also got Kendall Daniels. He's a safety, number 5, 12 tackles, 1 sack, 4 pass defenses, 5 pressures, 6 stops. And this guy's actually grading out above average. He's looking pretty decent. He's 6'4", 235 pounds, and he plays a ton of snaps in the box. You think 6'4", 235 pounds at safety, the first guy that pops in my mind is Taylor Mays. I think those were his exact measurables. If you guys are younger and don't know who Taylor Mays is, he was a USC safety and just jacked out of his freaking mind and would just lay the wood. But his run defense and tackling grades are pretty bad, and he struggles against the run, but he is good in coverage. Honorable mentions to Jeff Robertson and Cam Smith. They both had 10 tackles, but didn't quite make the list of stat leaders. So that is the defense for Oklahoma State. All right, real quick, I'm going to summarize what I saw from looking at the stat leaders and the stars from both teams, right? I think what I saw is right now, the star power on offense is a little more leaning towards Oklahoma State, right? Like Utah's star power on offense looks good, but not amazing right now, where Oklahoma State looks like they've really got some guys making plays. Again, Cam Rising's only played 3 quarters. That could change big time on Saturday once he's out there leading the charge, right? So I think, as I mentioned, it's Oklahoma State feels like they have a little more star power on offense, and Utah still looks solid on offense, but not quite as explosive from what we're seeing from Oklahoma State. And we're going to break down all the stats on the season so far of the actual per game and what each team's doing in a minute. But and then on defense, I think there's a clear disparity where Oklahoma State's defense does not look good. And I don't think that's unfair to say, right? You look at those numbers, what we just broke down. Utah has a very good defense. Oklahoma State looks like they have a defense that could potentially be a liability. And like I mentioned, we're going to break it all down here in a minute, but that's what I'm seeing so far. And just off the playmakers, Utah has the edge against Oklahoma State's defense. And I think there could be a small edge to Oklahoma State's offense against Utah's defense, but we're going to break it all down. I'm actually, right after this, we'll go ahead and break down each position group by PFF grade and take a look at every player. So that should get us a much stronger idea what we'll be looking at. And then after that, we're going to break down all the team stats. But should be a lot of fun. If you guys are enjoying the video so far, let me know what you guys think about the matchups here. Do you agree with what I'm saying? Where Utah's offense looks, to me, significantly better than Oklahoma State's defense. And I think there's a world we can make the case that Oklahoma State's offense looks a little bit better than Utah's defense. So I'd love to hear what you guys are thinking. Like the video if you're enjoying it so far, and subscribe to the channel. Let's go ahead and take a look at these PFF grades. All right, guys, and let's go ahead and take a look at the PFF grades for both teams. First off, I'm going to break down every position, even though we've already talked about some of the players. We're going to start with Oklahoma State. Alan Bowman, like I mentioned, is grading out extremely well, 80.6 passing grade, 82.2 overall grade, and that's on 122 passing plays. That looks fantastic. I think it's hard to, give him any hate there. And it's not like these guys are always wide open. I think he's getting a lot of, one-on-one matchups where it's like, hey, they're playing man coverage. And I think Utah will test him a little harder. But let's be real, it's still an impressive number. Moving on to the wide receivers, we touched on a lot of these guys, but Shetron was the guy I mentioned earlier who's only 45 snaps, but he's grading out at a 79. But the good thing for us is basically everyone outside of them is pretty below average. If any of these guys do see significant play, it looks like this guy, Ayo Shitomidi King, however you say that, is going to see a decent amount of snaps, but nothing crazy. So really good receiving core. I think that's one of the big stories is that this receiving core is making Alan Bowman look good, right? And quarterback's only as good as his receivers, so that's no shade on Bowman. It's just, hey, I think he's benefiting from them, which is good for him. So this is the guy, Ollie Gordon, right? He's the guy monster last year, and I think everyone's expected this year for him to really come on the scene and make some noise. But he's grading out well, according to PFF, but just the stats don't kind of back that up. And they got these two guys here. They're both going to get some carries, and get some offensive snaps, but they're both slightly below average. Like I mentioned, Howland, I did give honorable mention because he's got a good yards per carry average. Let's go ahead and move on to the tight ends. Moving on to the tight ends for Oklahoma State. Let's take a look. Boom. Okay. And right here. So you can see they got an average tight end, and tight ends are graded pretty critically. So a 65.6, I'd say that's a solid grade, average grade. And he's, not a great run blocker, but he's a good receiver. And then this other guy, pretty dreadful, but he's actually Foster is getting more snaps than Ford, and he is rough receiving, rough run blocking. So that's a good matchup for us there. I'd say he's borderline Huckleberry. And if you guys are new to the channel, Huckleberry means a guy that could be a liability and someone for the other team to attack. Joe Michalski. Joe Michalski here is 67.1, is the first member of their offensive line. He's their center. He's a 74.7 pass block, 62.2 run block. So slightly below average run block, but very good pass block and overall an above average grade. Solid center there. The guards for Oklahoma State, let's check them out. Boom, moving to the Big 12 and Oklahoma State. Okay, so you got two below average guards here, but that's not the complete story, right? Look, you could tell this team's doing well throwing the ball and struggling to run the ball, right? It's obvious by the grades. It's obvious by a lot of things we're seeing right away. So 62.5 for Preston Wilson and a 58.1 for Birmingham. So the 58.1 is borderline bad and 62.5 is just below average, but they're both excellent pass blockers, right? 83.6 is like elite pass blocking, and a 77 is very, very good, borderline elite, but this is a 51.1 is a terrible run block grade, and a 55.1 is pretty bad as well. So right out the gate, I think we got a big advantage in the run game. And what I like about that is I think that means we don't need to stack the box as much, because we do have a talented defensive line, and we'll break down our defensive line and our defensive group here in a second. But taking a look at their offensive tackles, this is a better group, right? Kind of all three of these guys are getting a decent amount of reps. But you can see the two big dogs are 61 and 71. They're getting the most reps, and they're both grading out in the 70s. Those are very good grades. Again, just like the rest of the offensive line, very good elite pass blockers for both of these guys, 90.4 and an 82.0. And then, above average run blocking for both these guys. And this number 72 guy, he's kind of the opposite, where he's above average run block, below average pass block. And it seems like they're kind of committing to throwing the ball. And I think that might be why you're seeing those guys be the ones starting. Who really knows? I mean, maybe Oklahoma State fans could fill in some info, give us some context there. But obviously, very good pass blocking offensive line, very poor run blocking so far this year, with their best guys being just slightly above average. So that's the group we're looking at. Okay, and we are going to start with Utah's defense now. So you take a look here: Smith Snowden, Zamiah Vaughn, and Elijah Davis. Smith Snowden's probably going to be matched up with their number 2 receiver, and I'm going to imagine Zamiah Vaughn is going to be matched up one-on-one with Stribling. That should actually be a pretty exciting matchup to watch. I didn't even consider that until I started talking about it, but I'm excited to keep an eye on that one. Elijah Davis as well as 68.8. So as much as they have a really good receiving core, we have a very good cornerback room. Honestly, some of these guys are really stepping up, and I'm excited to see it. This will be the first real big test of the year, but that Utah State receiving group was legit. And so, I'm excited to see how we do against this Oklahoma State receiving core. Okay, now moving on to the safeties for Utah. Let's take a look. Boom. Okay, so safeties for Utah, we've got Tao Johnson, ridiculously good grade, number 32 safety in all of college football, 82.1 run defense, 76.2 coverage, and a 79.4 defensive grade. And when you consider we're going to have 3 really good corners and we're going to have a elite level safety over the top in Tao Johnson, I think that bodes really well for us guys because we can take some risks. We can press them a bit. We can get in their face, and our corners are good, man. This is a good group of corners, and I like that we have him over the top. And then, if we want, we can have Nate Ritchie out there. Nate Ritchie struggled a little in the last game, right? On 98 defensive snaps. It's a below average grade. It's not terrible, 60, but you would like to see higher. But Nate Ritchie will probably be out there. Alaki Gilman, I don't like to see that. A 38.8, that's very poor. That's not a good grade. This is not Stanford. Just kidding. All right. Anyways, moving on to the linebackers for Utah. Let's see how these boys are doing. Again, Lander Barton, we talked about him earlier, 66.5 grade. Sione Fotu was actually grading out at a low 50 grade, so he must have had a pretty good game against Utah State. I did see some missed tackles, but glad to see his grade went up. Karine Reed, before he got injured, was a 74.9, and it's on 60 snaps, so it's not a tiny sample size, but we also have years of Karine Reed doing very, very well. So if he's back, that's a difference maker, and that's a very good linebacker group. Moving on to the next group, let's go ahead and take a look at our defensive line, starting with the defensive interior line. All right, boom. Remember, almost exclusively, this Oklahoma State team was great at pass blocking. Check out this D-line interior for Utah, bro. 74.9, 71.9, 69.5. And you take a look, they're more of run defenders and not as much of pass rushers, right? Above average pass rushers in a couple spots here with Tanuvasa and Tafuna, but the run defense for a couple of these guys is really good. And I think what that means to me, at least from my perspective, is we'll have such an advantage in run defense that our guys can sell out to stop the pass a little more, right? A little more than usual, which could give us an advantage because they have very good pass blockers. It's going to be a tough matchup, but I do like that we have such a big advantage in run defense compared to how they look run blocking. It's a really good sign as we start off the defensive breakdown. All right, moving on to our edge defenders. Edge defenders for Utah. Let's take a look. All right. Okay, boom. Okay, edge defenders for Utah. So Van Fillinger a 70.7. Then Logan Fano and Connor O'Toole a little below average right now. But I do expect both of them to have big games this week. There's been a lot of ups and downs for this edge rusher group, but Van Fillinger has been solid. Pass rush grade is very good. Again, these are very good pass blockers, and I think it'll be a very good test for Van Fillinger to see just how well he can do against with the pass rush against these guys. And then Logan Fano and Connor O'Toole, guys, it's time to step up. But I'd say right out the gate, they probably have a little advantage at tackle, right? When you look at the numbers, but we'll have a strong advantage on the interior against their interior offensive line, against our interior defensive line. And is that all the positions? Yeah. And that is going to be the defense for Utah. All right, guys, and now we are looking at the offense for Utah. So like I mentioned, Cam Rising is going to be the guy, 65 grade, slightly below average passing grade and average rushing grade. Honestly, like I mentioned, I disagree with these quarterback rankings, gradings more than any other position for PFF. So I wouldn't take too much from it. I think the numbers matter a lot more. Now let's take a look at the wide receiver group for Utah. Talented group. Excited to see some guys step up and show what they can do. Luca Caldarella started to get in the mix. He's got 62 snaps in the year, 66.8 grade. Obviously, Money Parks, Dorian Singer, and a lot of these, almost all of these snaps, at least the majority, were without Cam Rising. So once Cam Rising's back in, I'm excited to see how these guys do. Next, we'll move on to the running backs for Utah, a very solid group with a ton of potential. Let's take a look at the man leading the charge, Mekhi Bernard, 80.1 rushing grade, 78.5 overall grade, receiving grade 58.3, but that is not reflective of who he is. He's actually a very good receiving weapon and an elite pass blocking grade as well. So Mekhi Bernard looks awesome. Charlie Vincent, not going to get a ton of play, but he looks very good. Mike Mitchell looks good. Dijon Stanley looks good. Looks like a great group. Speaking of Jalen Glover, if you guys want to update there, the running back coach for Utah was talking, and it seems like he might have hinted at the fact that there were some off-field problems. He didn't say this. I'm taking what he said and pulling from it, right? So you guys can watch the clip. It's not hard to find, but it seemed like there might be some off-field issues that are leading to Glover not being in there. But I'm a big Glover fan. I hope he gets back on the field and hope he makes a huge impact. And then moving on to our tight ends, we got the Beast leading the charge. Boom, let's pull it up. Brant Keithy, but you look, Mickey Sugataraga on 70 snaps is performing almost as well as their best tight end. And then Dallin Bentley just slightly under the 60 mark. Caleb Lohner and Carson Ryan are looking really good too. They're just not getting enough snaps, but they're both studs too, and they're both performing better. So all three of our tight ends right there, which is funny. I don't know about you guys. I've been noticing this season with Bentley and Sugataraga. They're really out there to block. It feels like, because I noticed the plays from Bentley or from Lohner and Ryan way more than I noticed the plays from those guys or them being on the field. And then moving on to the next one, let's take a look at this offensive line, guys. This is going to be a treat for you. Utah is dominating in the offensive line arena to start this year. Moving on to center, 66.2 Jaron Kump leans heavy towards run blocking, below average to bad pass block, but good to very good run blocking. 66.2 overall grade, looks very good, but the treats are about to come for you guys. It gets very, very good here in a second. So for Utah, let's take a look at the guards. So Tanoa Togiai, guys, he is the number 7 ranked guard according to the PFF grading system, with a run blocking grade of 87.7 and a pass block of 54.4. So very poor pass block, but elite top of the country level run block. And Michael Mokofisi is still doing pretty good, right? It's an average grade, an 88.8 pass block. That's one of the best in the country at pass blocking. And then, below average run block. You'd want better, but it's not terrible. And let's take a look at these the tackles here for Utah. Very good tackle group here. They are dominant. So take a look here. Spencer Fano, sophomore offensive tackle, playing right tackle, is grading out at an 85.3 and 91.9 run block with a 60.8 pass block. So struggling a bit in the pass block, but top of the country level run block. And guys, like I said, he's a sophomore and he is the number 7 graded tackle according to PFF. That is very, very impressive. Caleb Lomu, though, redshirt freshman, looking great in pass block and run block, and a 79.4 overall grade, 76.4 run block, 76.3 pass block. And he's playing left tackle, and he's the number 20 rated offensive tackle in the country. Very, very impressive here. Our line looks better than I've seen it look in a long time. And I am ecstatic to see just how good they could be this year. It looks like an elite group. Okay, guys, and now we are moving on to the defense for Oklahoma State. So take a look here. I think at first glance, you think, oh, it's an above average group of corners, but take a look at the snap counts here, guys. This guy's pretty above average. Corey Black, 196 snaps, and he's a 67.7. But these guys are more rotational guys, these next two guys. And this guy's like average, and this guy's, quite below average to bad. But then this guy, Cam Smith, is getting 147 defensive snaps and grading out at a 45.4, super low. I think that makes me very optimistic for what our wide receiver weapons and receiving weapons will do against this DB room for Oklahoma State. Very exciting there. So now let's move on to their safeties. Taking a look at this group, Oklahoma State. Okay, so take a look here. Oklahoma State, a lot of safeties getting play here, right? 211 snaps, 149 snaps, 146 snaps, 104. But their number one guy getting snaps is Trey Rucker. We talked about him performing pretty poorly, especially in coverage. I like to see that. That means we'll be able to take shots over the top. He's definitely more of a run defender. But these other guys aren't great either. They're only real, this guy's average. These two are above average. So they got two solid safeties, but their number one guy getting play is Trey Rucker, but I'd say overall a solid safety room. So we'll give him that. Linebackers for Oklahoma State. Let's take a look. All right, boom. Okay, so you look here, both below average, borderline bad for their linebackers that are actually getting reps. So good sign for us, right? We kind of broke down both of these guys a little bit before, and they're going to struggle against the run, and they're not great in coverage either. They do rush the passer. This guy's an elite pass rusher. This guy's above average, but still, I think it bodes well. I think the obvious trend I'm seeing so far is that we're going to be able to run the ball pretty well on these guys. And when we need to, we'll be able to throw pretty well. Your defensive line, they've actually got some good players here. Their number one guy getting snaps, though, 54.9 grade, Iman Oates. He's getting more than double the snaps of anyone else. Kind of struggles in all categories, so that's good for us. But a couple of these rotational guys look pretty good, especially against the run. So I'm guessing these are guys that kind of get in on short yardage situations. But either way, our interior offensive line should have the advantage run blocking, even though they are good run blockers, especially on long yardage situations like a 1st and 10 or neutral yardage situations like 2nd and 8. We should have a pretty big advantage there. And then taking a look at their edge rushers for Oklahoma State to finish off the final PFF grades, we've got a really good rusher in Colin Oliver, right? He wasn't one of the stat leaders. That's why we didn't mention him earlier, but elite pass rusher and a guy that is going to be a problem. Our offensive tackles are going to get tested. Like I said, they're more run blockers, but I really hope that he gets to match up with Caleb Lomu. Caleb Lomu is our best pass blocker of the tackles, and I'm excited to see what that matchup looks like. They have a bunch of other solid edge rushers that are going to kind of rotate in. These guys are all kind of below average to bad. This guy's above average, but he's getting the least reps out of all of them. So we'll kind of see how that goes. But I'm not going to be surprised if we're double teaming and chipping on this Colin Oliver guy. He could be a game wrecker if we let him be, right, and we don't address him. So those are all the PFF grades, guys. And next we will move on to the team stats and then the final breakdowns. Okay, guys, and now we are going to break down the hard, cold numbers, right? This is going to be the team stats for each team as we head into this game on the season. So, taking a look here. So, Utah's strength of schedule is 38th in the country, right? And Oklahoma State's is 44th in the country. And this early in the season, it's really hard to tell. And this is according to team rankings. They're only counting FBS play. To me, that's a wash, and it's so early in the year. Let's just, even though Utah has a slight edge there, let's go ahead and count it as a wash, right? Arkansas and Tulsa, Baylor, Utah State. Personally, I could see how you'd make an argument that Arkansas and Tulsa is a tougher schedule, but I think Tulsa was really bad, and that's kind of why they're giving Utah the edge there. But overall, let's call it a wash, right? Let's call that a wash. Let's not spend too much time on that. So strength of schedule about even. Now we look at yards per game. So yards per game, Utah is averaging 376 yards per game, and Oklahoma State is, and Utah is 62nd in the country at 376 yards per game, and Oklahoma State is 18th in the country at 472.5 yards per game. Now, that's a really good number for Oklahoma State, right? They have basically 100 yards on us, right? It's yards per game. That's pretty impressive. Their passing game specifically, which we'll touch on here in a second, has been firing on all cylinders to start the year, and very impressive. And out the gate, guys, I'm just going to look at the cold, hard numbers and give us numbers there. We'll do some adjustments at the end to account for, players coming back like Cam Rising, right? You can't not account for Cam Rising. I know Oklahoma State fans don't want to hear that, but you do need to do some, I'd say, pretty strong adjustments to account for Cam Rising. But let's take a look here. So we just went over the yards per game for each team, but then we're going to flip it and we're going to look at the yards per game allowed for each team. So Utah is 36th in the country with 304 yards per game allowed, and Oklahoma State is 119th in the country with 500 yards per game allowed. So as impressive as Oklahoma State's offense has been, their defense has been, yardage-wise, equally unimpressive, right? They're at the very top of offensive yards per game and at the very bottom of defensive yards per game allowed. And then Utah, very average for their yards per game at the 62nd, 376 yards per game. Then yards per game allowed, pretty good. 36th in the country, 304 yards per game allowed. I think that's awesome. So you take a look at where those numbers come out to. That would mean that, you just take the averages there of Utah's yards per game against Oklahoma State's yards per game allowed. That's 376 against 500. That's going to get you 438 yards for Utah. Then you do Oklahoma State's yards per game at 472.5 against Utah's yards per game allowed. That's going to get you 388 yards for Oklahoma State. So both, right, putting up good numbers according to this, right? It looks great. Both teams looks like a high-flying matchup, but Utah does have the edge here, right? 438 yards per game for Utah, or yards in the game for Utah, and then 388 yards in the game for Oklahoma State. Next, we'll move on to rushing yards per game. Okay. This is going to be another area where Utah has a big advantage, but in a second, we'll look at where Oklahoma State has a big advantage. So Utah's rushing yards per game heading into this is 27th in the country. It's 195.5 rushing yards per game. Oklahoma State's rushing yards per game headed into this one is 109th in the country at 94 yards per game. Then the team's rushing yards per game allowed, Utah's 50th in the country at 124 yards, rushing yards per game allowed, and Oklahoma State is 92nd in the country with 174 rushing yards per game allowed. So you take those numbers, we contrast Utah's rushing yards allowed, or rushing yards at 195.5, Oklahoma State's rushing yards allowed at 174. That gets you a number of 185. Then we have Oklahoma State's rushing yards at 94 against Utah's rushing yards allowed. That's 124. You take that right in the middle, we should get 109 rushing yards for Oklahoma State. So 185 for Utah rushing, 109 for Oklahoma State rushing. And then let's take a look at the passing, right? The passing is a big one, right? That's going to be a fun one to take a look at. So for Utah, we are 89th in the country, only averaging 180.5 passing yards per game. Oklahoma State is third in the country, averaging 378.5 yards per game, a ridiculously good number. Now, on passing yards per game allowed on defense, Utah is 43rd in the country at 180 yards per game allowed. So very good there, at least well above average. Oklahoma State, though, another problem. They're 121st in the country with 326 passing yards per game allowed. So very high passing yards per game allowed for Oklahoma State. Let's go ahead and punch those numbers in. Let me go ahead and do the math here. So 180.5. And then we have, and this is for Utah, 180.5 passing yards per game against Oklahoma State's pass yards per game allowed of 326. That is going to get us a number of 253.25 passing yards for Utah. And then we have Oklahoma State's 378.5, so ridiculously good passing numbers heading into this game against Utah's very good pass defense of 180. You take that, brings them down to earth a little bit, right? You match those up against each other. It's 279.25 yards. And honestly, right there, even in passing yardage, it doesn't look like Oklahoma State's going to be that much better than Utah. And don't forget, we have not factored in Cam Rising yet. Then we take a look at the points per game for both teams. So points per game for Oklahoma State is 42 points per game. Utah, it's 30.5 points per game. And then we look at points per game allowed. Utah's 33rd in the country at 16.5 points per game allowed. Oklahoma State is 54th in the country at 20.5 points per game allowed. That would give you a final score of the game without any adjustments of Utah at 25.5 points in this game and Oklahoma State at 29 points in this game. So you look at that. I think the first thing we need to adjust for is the fact that Oklahoma State is playing at home, right? Oklahoma State's playing at home. That's a big advantage. And on top of that, Utah historically, especially Cam Rising, can struggle on the road at times, right? That does happen. So I think I'm feeling pretty generous here. Not just 3 points for the home field advantage, but I'm actually going to go ahead and give Oklahoma State 4 points for the home field advantage, putting them at an adjusted 33 points projected, right? And then you take Utah at 25.5 points per game, or in this game projected, but you add Cam Rising in, okay? Seriously, it's a huge factor. And I know Oklahoma State fans don't want to hear that, and Utah fans might think I need to adjust more than I want to, right? Than I'm going to, at least. I think you have to adjust pretty big for Cam Rising, guys. In my mind, for Cam Rising being in, I see us having to adjust this by 10 points. There's part of me that says 14 points, but I'm going to say 10 points, okay? And so 10 points you add on to that, that puts us at 35.5. And then you add in a guy like Karine Reed, should be back as well. I think you got to adjust for, at least, let's say 0.5 points. We'll just put it at 36. So 36 to 33. The other thing is on red zone trips. Oklahoma State is looking at 10 out of 14 red zone trips resulted in touchdowns, or for Utah, 5 out of 6 red zone trips resulted in touchdowns. So that's a 71.4% red zone touchdown percentage for Oklahoma State and an 85% red zone touchdown percentage for Utah. So a pretty big edge there as well. Now, that's all early in the season. It's not a ton of red zone trips, so I'm not factoring that in big time. But I do think when you break down the numbers, I think those are pretty fair adjustments. I'm not saying that's my prediction, but that's what the numbers would tell us. Raw, it would have a slight lean, 4-point win or a 3.5-point win for Oklahoma State. When you adjust for home field advantage and Cam Rising being back, I think it has a pretty strong lean towards Utah. So I'll give you my final prediction here in a second. Before I give you guys my final prediction, though, if you appreciate the video up to this point, I know it's a ton of data and it's probably pretty overwhelming. Please like the video. It'll help get the video out to more Big 12, Utah, Oklahoma State fans. Also, comment down below. Before I give you guys my final prediction, like I told you at the beginning, I want to hear what your final prediction is before I do it. I want to hear what you guys think. And then make sure you guys subscribe to the channel. But in a second here, I'll give you guys my actual prediction of how I think this game is going to go. Okay, guys, and now I'm going to give my final prediction for the game. So I think the numbers mean a lot, but neither team has played a team close to the talent level of the other team they'll be seeing on the field on Saturday, right? It's a big deal, right? It's there. These are two teams that are vying. They know what this game means for their year and what this means for their season if they could pull off the win. It is a huge game, and it will be critical to your season, right? It really will be. It doesn't. Either team could lose this game, still be in the Big 12 championship, and still go to the college football playoff, right? That could still happen. But this earlier in the year, you don't want a loss, right? Both teams are 3-0. You don't want to be 3-1, right? That means you have a long road to perfection if you want to get in that college football playoff or in the Big 12 championship. So it's going to be a lot of tension, a lot of emotion headed into this game. And I think Utah has two things on their side that travel really well, and that's going to be defense and running the ball. Okay. Utah has a great defense and they've looked exceptionally good early this year, right? When it comes to actually getting dirty and making plays, they're doing it, right? That's one thing about the Utah defense. Sometimes it's not a ton of turnovers, right? But we've been making a lot of turnovers early in this year, even though we've had some games that the stats look awesome. Where like Utah State, we gave up a lot of yards, but we were still making them. We were forcing turnovers. We were making plays. And we were pressuring a ton. And I think that will travel to Oklahoma State, right? And it'll shut up the fans a little bit when Keanu Tanuvasa and Van Fillinger and Connor O'Toole are lighting up Alan Bowman. I think it'll shake Alan Bowman a little bit. The other big thing for Utah is going to be the running game, right? I think we ran the numbers. The raw projection says 185 rushing yards, right? But that raw projection doesn't account for Cam Rising being there in the passing game, making plays with his feet, but also drawing attention away from the running game with his ability to throw the ball. So once that's factored in, the run game should be even more dominant than what we're seeing now. We broke down the PFF grades. Utah has a very strong advantage on our offensive line run blocking compared to their defensive line. And I think that's going to be a big factor. I expect at least 185 yards. I wouldn't be surprised if we hit a 200 plus mark against Oklahoma State. I know Oklahoma State fans are probably all up in arms, but the numbers are the numbers, right? I think Oklahoma State's going to have a really good passing attack, right? It says 279 yards was the raw projection, but I also think they're going to have to put up points. They're going to have to put up yards, and I think they're going to do that, if not a little more. I also think we're going to force some turnovers, and then they'll start to get rocky. We got to see how that goes. Like how much is Gordon get involved, Ollie Gordon get involved in this game, right? He's a monster running back and was a Heisman contender last year, is a Heisman contender this year, at least to start the year, but has kind of fallen off since. So we got to see how that goes. But I think it's going to be a good matchup, our defense against their offense. What do they try to do, right? How are they going to attack us? Because just like always, early in the game, we'll probably give up some scores and look a little sloppy here and there, but Morgan Scalley will adjust, we'll figure it out, and then we move forward, right? That's what happens every game. So my real prediction, like I said, the raw score showed one thing, but man, it's a tough one because I do think Oklahoma State has a solid to good quarterback in Alan Bowman. He's really impressed me this year, but I think a lot of it was those receivers against less than adequate defensive backs. Just being real about that. Like they're very good receivers, but they're not playing a Utah defense. And we broke down the PFF grades of how good our receivers are and their playmakers. They force turnovers. Our cornerback group this year is forcing turnovers. And we have Cam Calhoun as well, who I didn't even mention in the breakdown, but he's another really good corner on top of the guys we already have out there. So really good group here. So I think they're going to struggle to throw the ball because Teo Johnson, as much as he makes mistakes here and there, his PFF grades through the roof. And I think he's going to cover that over the top free safety spot really well. And if Ollie Gordon does break in the open field, I think Teo will do a great job of getting downhill and stopping him. So, final prediction, right? If you haven't said your prediction yet, make sure you guys say it, but I'm going to give my final prediction right now. I think Cam does well. I don't think he has some crazy game. I think it's like 250, two to three touchdowns, maybe one pick. I think the loud Oklahoma State crowd will shake him a little bit here and there. But I think our running game will keep them quiet and our defense will keep them from getting too excited, especially as the game gets going, right? Once we get in that mid-second, third quarter type of situation, then they'll be less of a factor because we'll be making enough plays to keep them quiet. And then like I said, I see the running game doing well, and I see it's weird. I actually see us. This is kind of weird to me. I see us doing well against their passing attack. I actually see Ollie Gordon having a good day. That's what I'm worried about. But the PFF grades don't say that. This offensive line can't run block, and that's probably legit, and that's probably why Ollie is not having a great year. They are not run blocking well at all. And so when I factor that in, oh, man, it's hard for me to give too much respect to Oklahoma State. There's definitely some respect. I think they're going to be a good team. I think they are a good team. I got Utah 34-24. I don't think they put up more than 24 points, and I don't think this defense can hold us to less than 34 points if Cam Rising is out there. And I think we have a dominant win. Hate me in the comments if you want, Oklahoma State fans, but I do think that's where the numbers are telling me to go, and that's where my heart's telling me to go. I wish you guys nothing but the best. If you guys want Big 12 content, make sure you subscribe to the channel. I'm out of here. Go Utes.